All right, today we're cracking open a really unusual set of letters. I mean, think about it. A masterclass in psychological manipulation, but from a perspective that almost nobody ever considers. We're diving into C.S. Lewis's brilliant and, frankly, pretty chilling classic, The Screwtape Letters.
Okay, so let's just jump right in. I want you to forget everything you think you know about temptation. You know, the pitchforks, the big dramatic acts of evil, all of that. Because what if the most effective way to corrupt someone wasn't some sudden, spectacular fall, but a slow, almost unnoticeable drift? What if you could be a fly on the wall inside hell's like corporate headquarters and get a peek at their playbook? That is the absolute genius of this book. And this quote, this just perfectly nails the book's terrifying logic. See, it's not about the spectacle of sin. It's all about the outcome. It's pure, cold pragmatism. The goal isn't to create some kind of movie villain. No. It's just to quietly, efficiently, and very, very gradually edge a soul away from the light and, well, into nothing.
So, you're probably wondering, how is this whole story told? Well, the book is basically a collection of 31 letters. They're written by this senior demon, he's like an undersecretary in Hell's administration, to his nephew, who's this rookie tempter out in the field. So yeah, let's meet the key players.
All right, so first up, you've got Screwtape. He's the veteran, the cynical, and honestly, pretty exasperated mentor. He's writing to his nephew, Wormwood, who is, fresh out of the academy on his very first assignment. And Wormwood, well, he's inexperienced, a little too eager, and let's be honest, he's not very good at his job. And their target? Just a regular guy in England during World War II. They only ever call him the patient. He's just become a Christian, and it's Wormwood's mission to, subtly wreck that newfound faith.
Now, to really get this, you gotta understand the lingo they use in Hell. It's completely backwards. God is only ever called the enemy. Satan is our father below. And people, in this kind of cold, clinical view, are just the patient. It's a simple twist, but it forces you, the reader, to see our whole world from this deeply unsettling perspective.
So you have to ask, what kind of mind dreams this stuff up? Well, C.S. Lewis wasn't always a religious guy. In fact, he was a well-respected scholar at Oxford, and for a long time a committed atheist. But then, in 1929, he converted to theism, and by 31, he was all in on Christianity. He famously called it the one myth that became fact, and it's this whole journey from deep skepticism to deep faith that gave him this incredible insight into both sides of the coin, the spiritual battlefield. And that's what he started writing about in 1941, right smack in the middle of World War II.
Okay, so what is the master plan here? What's the main strategy that Screwtape is just constantly hammering into his nephew's head? Well, as he lays it out, it's all about the approach.
And this right here? This is the central point of the whole book. Screwtape's argument is that big, dramatic, spectacular evil, it's actually risky. Why? Because it can shock someone. It can make them wake up, see what's happening, and turn back. The really effective method? It's that slow, comfortable, almost unnoticeable slide. It's a road so gentle you don't even feel the slope until it's way, way too late.
So yeah, forget about these grand conspiracies. Screwtape is adamant that Hell's best work is done in the most boring, mundane ways. He actually tells Wormwood, hey, don't waste your time trying to prove materialism is true. Just make him think it's, strong or stark or courageous. The key is to use jargon instead of actual arguments, to use the constant pressure of just everyday life, and to get him to make 1,000 tiny little compromises that over time completely change where his soul is headed. And what's the number one weapon in this whole toolkit? It's just distraction. Screwtape's advice is simple. Keep the patient's mind totally glued to the immediate, the physical, what he calls real life. Bus schedules, what's for lunch, the daily news. There's this amazing part where he describes an atheist in a museum who starts to have a really deep spiritual thought, and his tempter saves the day. How? By just suggesting, hey, isn't it time for lunch? And that was it. Once the guy was back on the street, the sight of a bus and a newsboy was all it took to make him feel like those deeper thoughts were just silly. And this whole strategy, this subtle art of distraction, it plays out by weaponizing the most ordinary parts of our lives. Things like our relationships, our pleasures, even our prayers. So let's take family life, for example. Screwtape gives Wormwood this incredibly detailed plan for creating what he calls daily pinpricks between the patient and his mom. Here's how you do it. First, you make him obsess about his own inner life, so he totally forgets to do the obvious helpful things for people around him. Second, when he prays for his mother, you make sure he's praying for her soul, which is just a code word for all her annoying habits, instead of, her actual needs like her rheumatism. And third, and this is a killer, you create a total double standard. He gets to judge his own snippy comments, literally, but he has to judge her words by their tone and what he suspects she means. And the result? You get a house just full of this low-level, simmering mutual annoyance. Genius, right?
And then there's pleasure. Screwtape's take on this is absolutely fascinating. He basically admits, look, we can't create pleasure. That's all the enemy's invention. All a demon can do is twist it, corrupt it. So the goal is to get people to enjoy these things at the wrong times, in the wrong ways, or way too much. And this leads to their perfect formula, an ever-increasing craving for an ever-diminishing pleasure. Think about that. In fact, they see simple, real pleasures like taking a walk or reading a good book is super dangerous. Why? Because those things are a touchstone of reality, and they can snap a person right out of the lies.
So what about something like prayer?
You'd think the strategy would be to inject all these evil thoughts, right? Nope. Screwtape's advice is the exact opposite. He says our best work is done by keeping things out. The whole goal is just to stop a person from making a real, honest connection with God. And they do it by getting the patient to look inward, to focus on trying to manufacture a feeling of devotion, instead of actually just reaching out to what he calls the presence in the room.
Okay, and this all leads us to what might be one of the most brilliant psychological ideas in the entire book. It's what Lewis presents as a natural law that just governs human life.
Screwtape calls it the law of undulation, and he has to explain it to poor, clueless Wormwood. He says, look, humans are basically amphibians. They're half spirit and half animal. And because they live in time, they're always changing. Their energy, their feelings, their interests, all of it just naturally goes up and down. A series of peaks and troughs, highs and lows. And he makes it clear, these spiritual dry spells, they're not something Wormwood caused. They're just a normal part of being human.
But this is where the battle really happens, because both sides have a strategy for these low points, these troughs. The enemy, according to Screwtape, uses these dry times to get a person to rely on more than just emotional highs, to build a faith that can actually stand on its own 2 feet, one that's based on will, not just feelings. But hell's goal? Oh, it's totally different. They use the troughs to tempt people with despair, with cheap pleasures. They want to whisper in your ear that this low point is going to last forever, that your faith was just a silly phase. And this is exactly why those troughs are so critical. This quote, man, it reveals what hell is most afraid of. It's not the person who's on a spiritual high, feeling close to God and full of passion. No, their biggest fear is the person who feels totally alone, who looks around the universe and sees zero trace of God anywhere, someone who doesn't even want to obey anymore, but still chooses to. That single act of will with no emotional reward at all, that is what makes a person an absolute nightmare for our Father below. So when you boil it all down, what's the ultimate warning of the Screwtape letters? It's not about dodging some big, spectacular sin. It's about something much quieter. It's about avoiding the slow, creeping power of nothingness. Okay, think about this one last, absolutely brilliant tactic. It all starts with this number. Screwtape tells Wormwood, your job is to make the patient feel like these 24 hours in a day belong to him. Because if you truly believe you own your time, then any little interruption, a friend dropping by, an unexpected phone call, it doesn't just feel like something that happened. It feels like a personal injury, a theft. And that just breeds this constant, low-level sense of being wronged over the tiniest thing.
And where does this slow, gradual slide lead? This quote from one of Screwtape's, let's call them success stories, is just gut-wrenching. It's the final realization of a totally wasted life. And not wasted on some grand passion or evil plan. No, wasted on what he calls a dreary flickering of the mind. A life spent doing neither what he ought to have done, nor, tragically, what he even liked to do. He was just distracted, right into nothingness.
So really, the core message is this. The book is arguing that the biggest danger isn't some magnificent, dramatic evil. It's the slow, steady buildup of thousands of tiny compromises, little sins, and wasted hours that altogether just sort of edge a soul away from the light and into the cold, empty dark. It really is that journey without signposts on a road so soft you never even notice you're going downhill.
And that brings us to the one last unavoidable question, a question for you. If that whole infernal bureaucracy was writing a file on your life, what would it say? What are the small habits, the daily pinpricks, the subtle little distractions that Screwtape would tell his nephew to focus on? It's a really chilling thought, isn't it? And that is exactly the thought C.S. Lewis wanted to leave us all with.